What you're about to see will make you question whether WWE has gone too far. Brock Lesnar just committed what can only be described as assault inside a wrestling ring, and Bronson Reed may never be the same again. This wasn't wrestling, this was a legitimate beatdown that crossed every line imaginable, and WWE officials are in complete panic mode trying to figure out how to handle the fallout. The footage is so disturbing that WWE initially refused to air it, but leaked videos are already spreading like wildfire across social media, and what they show will make your blood run cold. Bronson Reed, a man who has dominated every opponent put in front of him, was reduced to a broken, bleeding mess in less than 4 minutes by an out-of-control Brock Lesnar who seemed determined to end careers rather than win matches. But here's what makes this situation absolutely explosive: this wasn't supposed to happen. According to multiple sources backstage, this was supposed to be a standard match to showcase both wrestlers' abilities. Instead, it turned into the most one-sided destruction in WWE history, with Brock Lesnar completely ignoring the planned script and unleashing a level of violence that has wrestlers backstage genuinely scared for their safety. The match started normally enough, with both men circling each other and exchanging basic holds. But something switched in Brock Lesnar's demeanor after Bronson Reed landed a particularly hard shot to his ribs. What happened next can only be described as a complete mental breakdown, as the Beast Incarnate transformed into something that wrestling fans have never seen before. "I've never seen Brock like that," one backstage source revealed, speaking on condition of anonymity. "He was like a completely different person. His eyes went dead, and he just started destroying Bronson with a level of intensity that was genuinely terrifying to watch. People were backing away from the monitors because what we were seeing didn't look like entertainment anymore." The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when Brock landed a German suplex that was so violent, so unnecessarily brutal, that the sound of Bronson Reed hitting the canvas could be heard throughout the entire arena even without amplification. But instead of following up with normal wrestling moves, Brock grabbed Bronson by the throat and began delivering punches that were clearly not pulled. "Those weren't worked punches," revealed another source who witnessed the beating. "Brock was throwing legitimate shots with bad intentions. You could see Bronson's face swelling up in real time, and the confusion in his eyes as he realized this wasn't going according to script anymore. The referee immediately tried to intervene, but Brock Lesnar shoved him away with such force that the official was sent flying into the turnbuckles and momentarily knocked unconscious. This left Bronson Reed completely defenseless against a man who had apparently lost all connection to reality and was operating on pure predatory instinct. What followed was a systematic destruction that defies description. Brock lifted Bronson Reed and delivered not one, not two, but 7 consecutive German suplexes, each one more devastating than the last. By the 4th suplex, Bronson was clearly no longer able to protect himself properly, but Brock continued the assault with mechanical precision. "It was like watching someone break down a building brick by brick," described one horrified observer. Brock wasn't trying to win a match anymore, he was trying to dismantle a human being piece by piece. "The sound of those suplexes will haunt me forever." But the German suplexes were just the beginning of Bronson Reed's nightmare. When Brock finally released him from the devastating sequence, Bronson collapsed to the canvas like a broken marionette, blood already streaming from his nose and mouth. Any normal opponent would have been finished, but Brock Lesnar was just getting started. The Beast Incarnate grabbed Bronson Reed by his hair and dragged him to the center of the ring like he was handling a rag doll. What happened next crossed the line from professional wrestling into something that belonged in a back alley street fight. Brock began stomping on Bronson's ribs with the full weight of his 286-pound frame, each stomp delivered with maximum force and clear intent to cause serious injury. "You could hear ribs cracking," revealed a production assistant who was close enough to the ring to hear the impact. "The sound was sickening, and Bronson was making noises I've never heard a human being make before. It wasn't even screaming, it was like the sound of something breaking inside him." Security personnel were frantically trying to figure out how to intervene without getting themselves seriously injured by an out-of-control Brock Lesnar. The man who has conquered UFC heavyweight champions and NFL defensive lines was operating in a complete berserker rage, and nobody knew how to safely approach him. Meanwhile, Bronson Reed was trying desperately to protect himself, but every defensive move he attempted only seemed to anger Brock further. When Bronson tried to roll away from the stomping assault, Brock grabbed his ankle and dragged him back to center ring with such violent force that Bronson's knee appeared to twist unnaturally. "That's when we knew Bronson was seriously hurt," explained a ringside medic who was preparing to rush in despite the danger. "The way his leg was moving wasn't right, and you could see genuine panic in his face as he realized he might be looking at a career-ending injury." But Brock Lesnar showed absolutely no mercy for his injured opponent. Instead of backing off when it became clear that Bronson was legitimately hurt, he seemed to target the injured knee with surgical precision. He locked in what appeared to be a modified heel hook submission hold, but instead of applying it gradually like a normal wrestling move, he cranked it with immediate maximum force. The scream that came from Bronson Reed at that moment will haunt everyone who heard it. It wasn't the controlled selling of a professional wrestler, it was the genuine cry of agony from someone whose body was being damaged beyond repair. Several people in the production area had to leave their stations because they couldn't stomach what they were witnessing. "I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never heard anything like that scream," revealed a veteran WWE producer. It was the sound of someone's career potentially ending, and Brock just kept twisting that knee like he was trying to snap it completely in half. The submission hold went on for what felt like an eternity but was actually about 90 seconds of pure torture. Bronson Reed was tapping frantically, desperately, repeatedly, but there was no referee conscious to call for the bell, and even if there had been, it's unclear whether Brock would have released the hold. Finally, a group of WWE officials and security personnel made the decision to rush the ring en masse, hoping that sheer numbers would be enough to convince Brock to stop his assault. But even that intervention nearly backfired when Brock released Bronson's leg and turned toward the approaching group with what witnesses described as murder in his eyes. "For a second, I thought Brock was going to attack all of us," admitted one of the security team members. "He had this look like he didn't recognize where he was or who we were. It was like he was seeing enemies everywhere and was ready to fight his way through all of us to continue destroying Bronson." Fortunately, something in Paul Heyman's voice managed to penetrate whatever psychological state Brock had entered. Heyman had rushed to ringside and was shouting at his client, trying to bring him back to reality before the situation escalated even further. "Paul probably saved multiple careers that night," revealed a backstage insider. "He was the only person Brock seemed to recognize, and even then it took several minutes of talking before you could see awareness creeping back into Brock's face. But by then, the damage to Bronson Reed was catastrophic. The big man was lying motionless in the center of the ring, blood pooling beneath his head, his knee visibly swollen and twisted at an unnatural angle. Medical personnel rushed to his aid the moment Brock was led backstage, and what they found was worse than anyone had feared. Multiple facial fractures, possible concussion, definitely torn ligaments in the knee, probable broken ribs. Bronson looked like he'd been in a car accident, revealed a medical source familiar with the injuries. This wasn't wrestling damage, this was assault and battery damage. The immediate aftermath backstage was absolute chaos. WWE executives were frantically trying to figure out how to handle a situation that had no precedent in company history. Several wrestlers were openly questioning whether they were safe working with Brock Lesnar, while others were demanding answers about how such a violent assault could have been allowed to continue for so long. "Everyone was scared," admitted one wrestler who witnessed the aftermath. "If Brock could do that to someone as big and tough as Bronson Reed, what would stop him from doing it to anyone else?" The whole locker room was looking at each other wondering who might be next. Perhaps most disturbing were reports about Brock Lesnar's demeanor immediately after the assault. Multiple sources indicate that he showed no remorse, no concern for Bronson Reed's condition, and no acknowledgement that anything unusual had happened. "Brock acted like he'd just had a normal match," revealed one shocked observer. He was asking Paul Heyman about his travel schedule for the next day while Bronson was being loaded onto a stretcher. It was like he genuinely didn't understand that he'd almost killed someone. This complete disconnect from reality has raised serious questions about Brock Lesnar's mental state and whether he should be allowed to continue competing in WWE. Several wrestlers have reportedly refused to work with him until there's been a comprehensive psychological evaluation. The leaked footage of the assault has already begun circulating on underground wrestling forums, and the reaction from fans has been overwhelmingly negative. Many are calling for Brock to be suspended indefinitely, while others are questioning whether WWE has adequate safety protocols in place to protect wrestlers from colleagues who might suffer similar psychological breaks. "This footage is going to destroy Brock's reputation," predicted one wrestling journalist who has seen the leaked videos. "There's no way to spin this as entertainment when you can clearly see that Bronson Reed is genuinely terrified and hurt, and Brock is just methodically trying to injure him as badly as possible." WWE's initial response has been damage control in overdrive. The company has threatened legal action against anyone distributing the footage, while simultaneously claiming that reports of the incident have been greatly exaggerated and that both wrestlers are fine. But sources inside the company paint a very different picture. Emergency meetings have been held at the highest levels of WWE management, with some executives reportedly pushing for Brock's immediate termination while others argue that his star power makes him too valuable to release. "There's a war going on in the executive offices," revealed an insider familiar with the discussions. "Half the people want Brock fired immediately, while the other half think they can manage the situation and keep using him. But everyone agrees that this can't happen again." The medical report on Bronson Reed's injuries has been kept strictly confidential, but sources close to the situation indicate that his recovery timeline could be measured in months rather than weeks. There are genuine concerns about whether he'll ever be able to compete at the same level again. "Bronson's injuries are extensive," revealed a medical source. "The knee damage alone could require multiple surgeries, and that's assuming there aren't complications. The head trauma is also a major concern because of the repeated impacts he absorbed during that beating." Perhaps most tragically, Bronson Reed was reportedly on the verge of receiving a major push in WWE before this incident occurred. Creative team members had been developing storylines that would have elevated him to main event status, but those plans are now indefinitely shelved while he focuses on simply trying to recover from his injuries. Bronson was about to become a major player, revealed a member of the creative team. We had months of storylines mapped out that would have made him one of the top guys in the company. Now we don't even know if he'll ever be able to wrestle again. The psychological impact on other wrestlers has been immediate and severe. Several performers have reportedly requested that clauses be added to their contracts protecting them from having to work with Brock Lesnar, while others are considering whether they want to continue in a business where such violence can occur without warning. "Nobody feels safe anymore," admitted one wrestler who spoke on condition of anonymity. "If management can't or won't protect us from our own colleagues having violent mental breakdowns, how can we trust that we're going to go home healthy to our families every night?" The incident has also raised serious questions about WWE's medical and safety protocols. Critics are asking how such a violent assault could continue for several minutes without more immediate intervention, and whether the company has adequate procedures in place to handle wrestlers who suffer psychological breaks during matches. "Where were the safeguards?" demanded one former WWE wrestler who has since become a safety advocate. "How does someone get beaten for 4 minutes straight without medical personnel intervening? How does a referee get knocked unconscious and not immediately replaced?" The whole system failed Bronson Reed that night. Legal experts suggest that Bronson Reed could have grounds for both criminal assault charges and a substantial civil lawsuit against both Brock Lesnar and WWE. The footage clearly shows intentional violence that went far beyond the scope of professional wrestling, and WWE's failure to adequately protect Reed could constitute negligence. "This is exactly the kind of incident that could result in massive legal liability for WWE," explained one attorney who specializes in sports law. "If they knew or should have known that Brock posed a danger to other wrestlers and failed to take adequate precautions, they could be looking at millions in damages." The timing of this incident is particularly damaging for WWE, which has been working to improve its corporate image and attract mainstream sponsors. The violent footage directly contradicts the company's efforts to position professional wrestling as family-friendly entertainment rather than legitimate violence. "This is a public relations nightmare," admitted one marketing executive familiar with WWE sponsorship relationships. "How do you explain to family-oriented sponsors that one of your top performers nearly crippled another wrestler in what was supposed to be entertainment? This footage makes WWE look like underground fight clubs." Meanwhile, the wrestling community is grappling with deeper questions about the culture that allowed such an incident to occur. Many are pointing to the ultra-competitive, testosterone-fueled environment of professional wrestling as contributing factors to Brock's violent breakdown. Wrestling culture has always celebrated toughness and aggression, but this incident shows what happens when those qualities cross the line into genuine violence, observed one wrestling historian. "The business needs to seriously examine whether its culture is creating conditions where wrestlers feel justified in seriously hurting each other." Paul Heyman's role in managing Brock Lesnar is also under intense scrutiny following this incident. As Brock's longtime advocate and handler, questions are being raised about whether Heyman was aware of warning signs that could have predicted such a violent episode. "Paul has always presented himself as the guy who understands Brock better than anyone," noted one wrestling analyst. "But if he truly understands him, how did he not see this coming? And if he did see warning signs, why didn't he do something to prevent it?" The leaked footage has also revealed disturbing details about the crowd's reaction to the assault. Rather than showing concern for Bronson Reed's obvious distress, many audience members can be heard cheering and chanting for more violence, apparently unaware that what they were witnessing had crossed the line from entertainment into genuine assault. "The crowd reaction is almost as disturbing as the violence itself," observed one social media commentator who analyzed the leaked audio. "People were literally cheering for what appeared to be someone's career being ended. It shows how desensitized wrestling audiences have become to real violence." This crowd reaction has sparked broader discussions about whether professional wrestling has created an audience that can no longer distinguish between scripted entertainment and genuine violence, and what responsibility WWE bears for educating fans about the difference. The incident has also highlighted the physical toll that professional wrestling takes on performers' bodies and minds. Several retired wrestlers have come forward to share their own experiences with the psychological pressure and physical demands that can lead to mental breakdowns like the one Brock apparently experienced. "Wrestling is an incredibly stressful business," revealed one former main event performer. "You're constantly dealing with physical pain, travel exhaustion, and pressure to perform at the highest level. Sometimes that stress builds up until something snaps, and unfortunately Bronson Reed was in the wrong place when Brock snapped." The long-term implications for WWE's roster management are significant. The company may need to implement new psychological evaluation procedures, enhanced medical monitoring, and revised safety protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. "This changes everything about how WWE has to operate," predicted one industry insider. "They can't just assume that wrestlers will be able to control themselves in high-stress situations anymore. There have to be better safeguards, better monitoring, and better intervention procedures." As news of the incident continues to spread throughout the wrestling world, the reaction from other promotions has been swift and decisive. Several companies have issued statements emphasizing their commitment to wrestler safety and suggesting that WWE's incident demonstrates the need for industry-wide safety reforms. This incident reminds all of us that wrestler safety has to be our top priority, read one statement from a competing promotion. The trust that performers place in their opponents is sacred, and when that trust is violated, it damages the entire industry. The financial implications for WWE could be substantial. Beyond potential legal settlements and increased insurance costs, the company may face sponsor defections and negative publicity that could impact television ratings and merchandise sales. Sponsors don't want to be associated with legitimate violence, explained one marketing expert. If this incident becomes widely known outside the wrestling community, it could make WWE toxic to mainstream advertisers who are already nervous about the wrestling business. For Brock Lesnar personally, the incident represents a potential career-ending scandal. His reputation as a legitimate tough guy has now been overshadowed by questions about his mental stability and ability to control himself in competitive situations. Brock's whole persona was built on being this ultimate fighter who could dominate anyone, noted one wrestling commentator. But now instead of seeing him as impressively tough, people are going to see him as dangerously unstable. That's not a character you can market to families. The incident has also raised questions about whether Brock's history in legitimate fighting sports like UFC contributed to his inability to distinguish between scripted wrestling and real combat when his emotions were running high. Brock has spent years in situations where the goal actually was to hurt your opponent as badly as possible, observed one combat sports analyst. Maybe when he got angry enough, he reverted to that mindset and forgot that wrestling is supposed to be cooperative rather than genuinely competitive. Medical experts have suggested that the incident could be related to CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or other brain injuries that Brock may have sustained during his combat sports career. Such injuries are known to affect impulse control and emotional regulation in ways that could explain his violent outburst. We're learning more every day about how repeated head trauma affects behavior, explained one neurologist familiar with sports-related brain injuries. If Brock has suffered significant brain damage from his fighting career, it could explain why he lost control in a way that seemed completely out of character. Regardless of the underlying causes, the immediate question facing WWE is whether Brock Lesnar can ever safely return to active competition. The liability issues alone may make it impossible for the company to continue using him, regardless of his drawing power and star status. How do you put someone back in the ring after they've demonstrated that they might seriously injure or kill their opponent, asked one legal expert. Even if Brock gets psychological help, the liability exposure would be enormous if something like this happened again. The wrestling industry as a whole is now grappling with questions that have no easy answers. How do you maintain the illusion of violence that makes wrestling entertaining while ensuring that the violence never becomes real? How do you handle performers who may be dealing with brain injuries or psychological issues that affect their judgment? This incident is going to force the entire wrestling business to grow up in ways it's been avoiding for decades, predicted one industry veteran. The days of just hoping that wrestlers can handle themselves are over. There have to be real safeguards, real accountability, and real consequences when things go wrong. For Bronson Reed, the immediate focus is on recovery and hoping that his injuries won't permanently end his career. But the psychological trauma of being systematically destroyed by a colleague he trusted may be even harder to overcome than the physical damage. The betrayal aspect of this is huge, explained one sports psychologist. Bronson went into that ring trusting that Brock would work with him to create entertainment. Instead, Brock tried to legitimately hurt him. That kind of betrayal of trust can be devastating to someone's ability to continue in the business. The incident has already become a cautionary tale throughout the wrestling industry, with trainers and veteran wrestlers using it to emphasize the importance of trust and professionalism in a business built on simulated violence. Every wrestling school is going to be showing this footage as an example of what not to do, predicted one training facility owner. It's going to be required viewing for anyone who wants to understand why we have such strict rules about protecting your opponent. As the immediate shock of the incident begins to fade, the wrestling world is left to confront some uncomfortable truths about the business and the people who participate in it. The line between entertainment and reality has always been blurred in professional wrestling, but Brock Lesnar's assault on Bronson Reed showed what happens when that line disappears completely. The full consequences of this incident will likely unfold over months or years, but one thing is already clear: professional wrestling will never be quite the same. The illusion that wrestlers can always control themselves and protect each other has been shattered, and rebuilding that trust will require fundamental changes in how the business operates. For now, Bronson Reed remains hospitalized while Brock Lesnar's future hangs in the balance. The wrestling world watches and waits to see whether this incident will serve as a wake-up call that leads to meaningful safety reforms, or whether it will simply be another tragedy that the business tries to forget as quickly as possible. The Beast Incarnate may have won his match, but in doing so, he may have destroyed everything that made him valuable to begin with. And Bronson Reed, who entered that ring as a rising star, may have had his dreams ended by someone he trusted to help him achieve them. This is what happens when professional wrestling stops being professional, and the consequences will be felt throughout the industry for years to come.